All right, everyone, let's get started. I just started recording, so please be aware the recording is on for this. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We're really thrilled to have you here. And we're really thrilled to have our speaker, Hunter Morency, is going to be talking to you about data collection and some of the resources that are out there to support you in collecting all of the metrics that you need for the projects that you're putting on. I'm going to stay, but I'm going to turn over running the meeting to Hunter. I will manage chat, so if you have any questions, you can drop them in there. If you don't want to raise your hand, put them into chat, and I will interrupt and ask your question for you if that's necessary. Recording of this will be available on the website. I'm hoping they'll all go up next week. And eventually they will all move to the new WorkSource main website in October, so you'll be able to reference them again in the future. So thank you so much. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Hunter.
Great. Thank you, Molly, and thank you for the introduction. I'm going to just take a quick moment to share my screen, and then we'll get started. So I'm just going to make sure this works. Let's see here. Oh, wrong way. Oh, there we go. Can everyone see my screen okay in the slides? Excellent. All right. Molly asked me to talk a little bit about data collection basics and available resources. She said that many of you on the call would be representing some businesses, maybe working in HR and those sorts of things. So I wanted to give you basically just the basics for how data collection works. What are some things that you need to consider when you're doing any sort of data collection or evaluation piece? And also this can be somewhat interactive as well. I have about 40 minutes of material here. I'm happy. I know we have a pretty small group today, so if anyone wants to jump in with questions at any time for me to explain some more specifics, you're welcome to do so. And if we do have some time left, I do have a demonstration that we can do at the end of the presentation if that's helpful as well. But without further ado, I'll introduce myself and give you some background as to why I'm speaking to you today. And also just wanted to give you some background on how I use data. I manage the MAIN-EARN system. MAIN-EARN is a big fancy acronym that basically stands for Main Education Attainment Research Navigation System. It is basically a series of applications with a data warehouse as the endpoint that houses over 1 billion records from a variety of different sources. We use this information for many different things. One of them is to analyze the current conditions of Maine's labor market. We do program evaluations, but ultimately everything that we do is to try to assist with data-driven decision-making. And that's generally when you're collecting information, that's usually your purpose, is to try to figure out, try to answer questions and try to produce things that are actionable, that can gain new insights to make whatever you're doing more efficient or better produced. So I just want to go over some of the topics that I'd like to talk about today. One of them is, what considerations do you need to make before you collect any data? I want to talk a little bit about how data collection works and what are some of the mechanics behind it. I want to do a couple of slides on personally identifiable information and how and steps that you can do to protect it. I want to also talk about some of the laws that are governing data. Molly says that there's generally a variety of partners that are either on this call or maybe listening to it at a different time. And depending on what industry you're working in or what information you're collecting, that information might be governed by state or federal law. We'll do 3 case studies on some data collection, different topics, and different ways that you can collect some information. We'll kind of end with best practices and how Molly, myself, Michael, who's on the call, is also somebody who works in the Maine Department of Labor, how we might be able to assist you with any sort of grant evaluation work that you're doing. And then if we have time after that, I do have a demonstration on how to set up Google Forms and how you can get information using those. So I want to start off first by what consideration should you make before collecting data? And really the first question that you always want to ask is, what is the information that you want to know? What is the purpose of my data collection? After you've identified the information that you want to know, you need to, what you want to know, ultimately, what is that question that you desire to answer? You need to figure out what information do you need to collect that information. And one of the key points when doing any sort of data collection is you ultimately want to collect the minimum amount of information that you need in order to answer the question that you want. If you're doing like surveys and those sorts of things, and you might have experience with this taking surveys, if you get a 30 question survey, you're much less likely to answer it than if you get maybe a 10 or 12 question survey. Something that takes just a few minutes is something that somebody is more likely to share. It also, when we get into talking a little bit more about confidential information, if you have less confidential information, there's less of a liability on your part to protect it. So generally best practices, you want to collect good information, but you also want to collect the minimum amount of information that you need to meet your collection obligations. On top of that, you also have to ask yourself, is the information that you're collecting sensitive? Will you need to protect this information? And I think in a couple slides from now, I'll go over just what is sensitive information versus not sensitive information. For the most part, I'd say it is generally like when you see it, you know what is confidential versus what is not confidential. But we'll go into that a little bit more later on in the presentation. You also want to ask yourself who will have access to the information, and that will determine, or depending on the sensitivity of the information, you'll want to limit access to that information as well. However, if you aggregate your information to where data is not personally identifiable, that information can be accessed by much more people than what you could do if you were only talking about microdata. And then you also want to think about, how can you collect this information? Can I collect this information using a survey? Should I collect this information off of application forms? Should I collect this information organically, which is basically as information appears, you write it down and collect it. Ideally, the information already exists that you're trying to work with, whether that's like payroll information or information about clientele that you're working with that's already collected off of, say, application forms. Ideally, that data already exists somewhere, but if it doesn't, you'll want to consider different ways to collect the information that will give you the best chance to get good quality information. And finally, kind of on top of all of this, you want to ask yourself, why is it important that I collect this information? Especially when you're dealing with sensitive information, you want to make sure that you're collecting this information for a specific purpose to answer a specific question. I just want to go over the basics on how data collection works. Ultimately, data collection starts always from an individual person, a source. Say that the information can come off of an application, the information can come from somebody filling out a survey, but the information exists somewhere, and it generally starts with an individual. That information is collected through an instrument, which is can be some sort of like form or somebody entering information, and then that information has to be stored somewhere. And depending on what information you're collecting and how much information you're collecting, your storage you may consider different things for storage. Sometimes things can just be collected on a single spreadsheet if it's just being used for a very specific purpose. But if it's like a longitudinal study that you'll be collecting data over the course of time, you may want to consider database applications or even working with vendors to set up a data system to collect that information. There's actually kind of a fourth piece on here that I probably should have added, that would be an area where you would do your analysis. Generally, you wouldn't necessarily do your analysis right out of a database or display your analysis out of a database. The information you would aggregate up into some sort of report, maybe some sort of dashboard or those sorts of things. But basically, that's just how how data flows. It generally starts with a person or a source that has the information, and that information moves to the area where it can be used for for evaluation purposes. The second piece of this picture right here is the data collection instrument. And again, I'll just give you some basic instruments that are generally used as a piece of data collection. And the collection method that you use is going to be based on the confidentiality of your data. And we can get into this in a couple slides when I do start talking about confidential data. But some collection methods that you might use in order to obtain information are paper forms or application, online forms or surveys, which depending on the information you're collecting may or may not have to be encrypted. Oftentimes, you may want to do interviews or focus groups in order to collect information. Like, for example, if I wanted information on how meaningful this presentation was, I may want to reach out to a couple of you just to get some verbal ideas of how this might be. And so I could set up a focus group or an interview. You may end up doing telephone surveys where the person at the end of the telephone survey is entering the data into the instrument. Or ideally, the records already exist somewhere in your system, and you're just pulling that information together for reporting purposes. Most of the time, that we consider that administrative records. Now, I do want to talk a lot about data security, because depending on the information that you're collecting, it may or may fall under some sort of federal law, or you may need to take some extra steps in order to protect the information that you're working with. The information that generally you would need to take extra steps to protect are personally identifiable information. Personally identifiable information is something that can be used to identify a single person. And the official definition from the National Institute of Security and Technology is right here. I actually think it's probably valuable if I read it, so I'm just going to read it real quick. It is any information about an individual maintained by an agency, including any information that can be used to distinguish or trace an individual's identity, such as name, social security number, biometric record, etc. And two, any information that is linked or linkable to an individual, such as medical, educational, financial, and employment information. Now, I'll give a couple of examples of what PII is, so that you know during your if you are collecting any of it. The first thing is full names, maiden names, aliases, which could be like nicknames or what people call themselves, is considered personally identifiable. So if you are collecting a survey and you ask for a person's name, realize that that record with the person's name on it is considered PII. Even more sensitive personally identifiable information is obviously a social security number, a passport number, driver's license, financial account, credit card numbers. These are all things that you could collect on a person. That's not necessarily easy to collect on a person, and something that bad actors could use in order to impersonate a person. So if you're probably most of you are not collecting any of that information outside of potentially social security number in your payroll systems. So generally you don't necessarily have to worry about that. But if you are collecting that information needs to be stored in an encrypted environment where there's only a limited number of folks that have access to that information. Physical addresses, email addresses, and telephone numbers are also considered PII. Again, if you have a full name of a person, you can often find some of this information on a person through public records and those sorts of things. So again, it's not as crucial to protect as the SSN passport number, driver's license number, etc., but it's something that you do have to take precaution when you are storing. Information about personally owned property is considered confidential, and biometrics information, which I highly doubt anybody has here, but that would include fingerprints, face scans, those sorts of things. Again, something that bad actors could use to easily impersonate a person. So if you do happen to have some of that information in your system, you will want to take extra precaution, but I highly doubt for the most part that you would be using any biometrics, but just something that you'll want to consider. And because there may be a lot of different industries that do end up watching this video at some time, I do want to just list some of the laws that protect some of the information. Like, for example, if you're a healthcare institution, any healthcare data that you collect falls under HIPAA, which is probably an acronym that if you go into a doctor's office, you hear quite a bit. I had a tick-borne illness that I'm just recovering from, so I spent a lot of time in the doctor's office, and every time I go in, they ask me if I want to sign the HIPAA form, acknowledging that my information will be protected, and those sorts of things. So HIPAA is usually an acronym that you may have heard of. Educational institutions that collect information on their students or participants, that information is protected under FERPA. Financial institutions that collect financial and banking data are protected by the GLBA, and information that generally we work with, or any entity that is collecting or storing federal data falls under the jurisdiction of FISMA, the Federal Information Security Management Act. This may also apply to you if you are receiving federal grants as well. Any information that's collected with that federal grant, you need to consider FISMA, which FISMA basically just sets standards for how you need to collect and store that information. And I'll talk about those standards in the next slide. It is important to be somewhat aware of these laws, particularly HIPAA, FERPA, and the GLBA. Because violations of those laws can result in civil or criminal penalties. FISMA also can result in civil or criminal penalties, but protection isn't as explicitly stated in that act as the other ones. And if you are a educational institution, a healthcare institution, or a financial institution, you probably have heard one of those acronyms one or several times. And ultimately, if you follow these 7 best practices, you generally are covered under the protection of these acts. So I'm just going to go over some of those the best practices to safeguard PII or any information that you're collecting on an individual. The first one is to minimize collection and retention. So again, you only want to collect the information that is required in order for you to finish whatever evaluation that you're doing. So generally, that takes some legwork in the beginning before you do any sort of reporting or data collection to really determine what is the information that I need, and that way that you're getting the most pertinent information without having to ask for too much information. You also want to generally have a retention period. So at the end of X amount of time, you purge those records from all your system, and that way you're eliminating yourself of any potential liability. Even with payroll systems, it might be worth considering deleting records after a period of time. Almost every record at the Department of Labor has some sort of data retention timeline, where after the timeline we do go in and purge the records. You want to restrict access to the information to only authorized personnel. So you don't want to give microdata to third-party sources without some sort of waiver and those sorts of things. So definitely consider who has access to the information. You generally don't want to be sharing PII or microdata over email, because that way it can kind of explode and get lost, and you lose control over who has access to it. You're going to want to put your personally identifiable information in encrypted areas. If you're using Microsoft O365, that's an encrypted area that meets FIPS 142. Google Drives meets FIPS 142, provided that you don't share the information outside of that. So it's worth looking into where and how you're storing your data and making sure that it meets FIPS guidelines. When you're transmitting data through a network, you want to make sure that you're meeting the requirements of TLS 1.2. And again, when you're working with software, they will say that their cryptography meets TLS 1.2 in any sort of agreement that you have. So you are able to find if your technology meets that. Like, for example, if you are on the internet and you see HTTPS // that means that the page that you are on is encrypted, and any information that you would be sending to that page would be encrypted back to the source. But if you don't see HTTPS at the very beginning of the URL, that means that the page that you're on may not be encrypted, and I wouldn't recommend sending any sort of information across that network. So there are certain ways that you can tell right away whether there is encryption as you're moving information through networks. You want to audit where all of your information is. So if for example, I had a list of students and I sent it over to Michael for evaluations, I would want to keep track that Michael has access to that information, and I'd want to make sure that that information is not shared beyond Michael, for example. You do want to be generally prepared for data breaches and have some sort of incident reporting protocol. I meant to put a link in here. If Molly hasn't sent out or posted the slides yet, I'll add a link of what the state of Maine incident reporting looks like, so that you might be able to use it as a model. And generally, you always want to do just some basic training and awareness in how to protect personally identifiable information. And if you do these 7 things to safeguard PII, you're generally you're covered under a lot of these laws. But it does require you to understand what some of this information means, and also requires you to ensure that the software that you're using meets the encryption protocol that is required. Let me see. I think there might be something in the chat. Let me double check. But if anyone has any questions before I go on to case studies, please, you're welcome to have the floor.
I was just dropping my contact info into chat so I can email slides to people directly.
Oh, great. Thank you, Molly. All right. So now I'm going to just bring over a couple of case studies of data collection. And before every data collection journey, you should kind of refer to those questions that we talked about on one of the earlier slides of basic considerations. One of those is, what is the information that I need to know and why is it important? Number 2 is, what is the information that you're collecting in order to meet that need? Number 3 is that information sensitive? And if that information is sensitive, what do I need to do to protect it? And number 4 is, ultimately, how should I collect this information? So the first case study right here is an example of if you've received a grant from the Department of Labor, potentially through one of the workforce boards or Molly's office. This might be something that may apply to you. This example is, I need to evaluate the impact of a grant-funded course provided through an industry partnership. Just a potential example of what this course might be. You receive money from a grant to send folks to a course that may have the people that you sent to, that may open up some doors to the people that you sent to this course. So you'll want to do a couple of things. The first thing you want to ask yourself is, what is the information that I need to know, and why is it important? Generally, grants will ask you to do some sort of evaluation. You'll want to refer to your grant or your grant partners to see what they might be asking for. But you may also want to do your own internal evaluation as well. In this case, if you're trying to understand the impact of a grant-funded course, that impact may have to do with employee retention, promotional opportunities of your employees, and maybe an increase in pay. So those might be some of the things that you may want to look at when you're doing your grant evaluation. So in order to get that information, you want to think about, what do you need to collect? Well, the data elements that you would need to collect are, first off, the course roster. Who are the people that we sent to this course, so that we can identify those people in our system and be able to evaluate the impact the course had on those individuals. The second thing that you would want to know is the position of those individuals, their pay over time. So pay as their position may change. the start and end dates of that individual so that you can get an idea of the employee retention, and of course, as I already mentioned before, the course roster. Because this information is on individuals, and specifically individuals that are inside of a course, and also has employment and earnings of those individuals, the information is sensitive. It's generally stored in a payroll system, and payroll providers do a very good job protecting their information. So in general, that information likely does meet the encryption standards that we talked about on a couple of the previous slides. But you do have to be aware that this information is confidential. So you don't want to just pull the information and then send it to a bunch of people in the office to do the evaluation. You want to make sure that you know exactly who has the information, and that you're storing it in a safe environment. The best way to collect this information is through your payroll system. So hopefully your payroll system has all of this information. If your payroll system does not have this information, and say you're trying to evaluate a course through a DOL grant, you can go to the Department of Labor, and we may be able to find some ways to get that information for you. But ideally, that information is inside of your payroll system, and you do have access to it. So the conclusion of this is, in order to answer this particular question, you would want to take a look at what a person what position a person is in before the course, what is their pay, and what is their start date. And then you're going to want to take a look at that person over time to see, are they getting paid more money? Are they being asked of more responsibilities? Has their position changed? And ultimately, you may want to compare the retention of those employees versus the retention of other employees that you have in your payroll system to identify whether the course had the intended consequences. Before I move on to the next example, are there any questions about this example?
I have a quick one, Hunter, and I don't know if you're going to be able to answer it or not, but it's pretty common with sector partnerships that not everyone who's engaging in the partnership has access to the same tracking tools. So for example, a large sector partnership may have multiple employers and thus multiple payroll systems, and those companies would have to be willing to report out and share that information with the rest of the partnership. Any recommendations on either platforms that people could use to safely share that kind of information, or how that adjusts how the partnership talks about securing their data if it's being shared with multiple agencies?
That is a great question. Also a loaded question. Because sector partnerships is related to DOL, if somebody is running into that situation, feel free to reach out to me. There are a couple different things that us at the department can help out with. One would be to help facilitate the conversations between multiple employers, to try to share very sensitive information, and also provide a platform or suggest platforms where you could share that information. The other thing that we could do is we do have access to administrative records over at the Department of Labor, and I'll talk a little bit more about what those records are. So if you're in the situation where you're having a hard time getting information from an employer, we might be able to come up with a workaround through our system where we could help you meet the reporting requirement of the grant, and ultimately get some very insightful information about the course. But Molly, you brought up a very difficult thing that I didn't consider. It is definitely hard to get large employers to share payroll information to any sort of party, a third party, etc. And I can see why the information is extremely sensitive, and it is protected by all the information that I provided earlier. But there are workarounds that we may be able to help out with. And if you reach out to Molly or myself, we'd be happy to help you.
Thanks, Hunter.
All right. The next example that I have is one that is generally not considered confidential information, and something that again is can be extremely valuable. And actually something that you might be able to use when you're evaluating a grant or an industry partnership or any sort of intervention that you may introduce in your system, and you just want some feedback on whether that intervention was impactful. For this particular example, it's just I want to conduct a survey on employee satisfaction. So the first question you want to ask yourself is, what do you need to know and why is it important? In this particular example, you want to know what the satisfaction level is of your employees, so you can say improve worker retention. The information that you may want to collect is information on job fulfillment, compensation and benefits, work-life balance, career development and growth, anything about workplace culture, satisfaction with management. And you'll want to ask these questions in a way where it's not necessarily asking like real specifics. Like, for example, when I say compensation and benefits, I wouldn't necessarily be asking the person to say, what is your hourly rate and what benefits do you get in your position? It might be something more like, are you satisfied? Do you feel that your compensation and benefits meet your expectations for what you do? Are you satisfied with your compensation and benefits? And that makes it a little bit less sensitive than asking specifically for how much are you making in an hour? So you'll want to frame your survey in that sort of way. If you frame your survey broad enough, the information is not sensitive. When doing an employee satisfaction survey, you generally don't want to ask information that is more granular than just what is your position or what team are you on. You don't necessarily want to ask, what is your name and what is your hourly rate, those sorts of things. You would just generally ask, what is your position, and then may have just a bit of questions on job fulfillment, compensation and benefits, etc. for your information. Provided that it is just a survey that is just as granular as position and team, this would be considered an anonymous survey, and the results would not be considered sensitive information. As long as you aggregate the information up, it can be shared with anyone that you feel comfortable sharing the information on. And again, you get a lot more information about how your employees feel. And you may also get feedback on what information that your company needs to work on in order to grow. This type of survey can be done with all kinds of different things. Like, for example, if you do send a bunch of employees to a presentation or a course or something like that, you may conduct a survey on if they felt like that was beneficial to their time, so that you can consider either sending more people in the future or maybe skipping out on that opportunity in the future. The one thing that I will say when conducting employee satisfaction surveys, if you want to compare them year over year to evaluate whether you're making progress as an organization, you want to try to make those questions as comparable as possible on your later surveys as they were on the previous surveys, so that you can measure growth. The third and final example that I have is actually one that I kind of workshopped with an employer who owns a hotel, who told me that they were considering hiring extra staff because front desk employees were spending a lot of time answering customer inquiries on the phone, that they didn't necessarily have enough time to do some of the things that were required of the front desk position. So they were trying to consider, what are ways where we get less customer inquiries. Ultimately, they were trying to figure out how they may be able to spend less time answering basic questions. So this So we'll go through the 4 questions that you should ask yourself when conducting any sort of data collection opportunity. The first is, what's the information that you need to know and why is it important? What you want to know is what questions are staff spending the most amount of time answering, so that you might be able to use your resources to reduce those customer inquiries. Like, for example, if your staff are answering a lot of questions about what are your hours of operations or what services you provide, you might be able to spend more of your resources on better marketing material, or make changes to your website, or find other avenues where customers can get that information so they don't necessarily have to pick up the phone. In the case of this employer, they were spending a lot of time reserving rooms, and they felt that their software was not the software that they were using to make reservations was intuitive enough for a lot of customers. So after conducting their data collection, they actually went through another vendor, which was kind of interesting. So the information that they would be collecting are what are the inquiries received by staff, and you may also want to figure out how long do those inquiries take to answer. Like, for example, an inquiry on hours of operations may be just a 30-second phone call, whereas inquiries about what services you provide, what amenities you have, may be much more comprehensive. The great thing is, unless you're collecting information on the person that you're receiving the call from, the information is not sensitive. And this would be an example of organic data collection, which is the person who is receiving the information, the person at the other end of the line who's picking up the phone call, is basically entering that information. In this case, or in most cases, when you're doing organic data collection, I would do it through like a web form or a Google form. And that way, the answers are always standardized when you're receiving the information. The other thing that I would recommend too is to try to categorize your information as well. Like, for example, if you are getting inquiries on what amenities do you have, what services do you provide, what are your hours of operations, can I reserve a hotel room, for example, though you may want to create different categories for those. Otherwise, the person that is entering the data is generally entering a few sentences, and that can get a little bit messy when you go and do your analysis. But generally, this is a low stress way to collect information. It's organic, it's not sensitive. You can share the results with anyone on your staff, and generally something that you may want to know as well. So those are just 3 examples of different cases of why you need to collect data, what questions are you trying to answer, and then also the how to do it, and how to also do it to try to minimize the amount of sensitive information that you're collecting. All right, so this is actually my second to last slide. We're just gonna go through data collection best practices once again. The first one is to define clear objectives. You can define clear objectives by going over the questions that we had while we were using the case study and at the beginning of this presentation right here. Having clear objectives, make sure that you're limiting the amount of information that you're collecting to only what you need, and basically being as concise as possible during the data collection process. The second thing that you'll want to consider is maintaining consistency to ensure data quality. That consistency can occur 2 different ways. The first is if you're doing a survey or doing some sort of longitudinal study, you want to try to make the collection as consistent as possible over time. So if you're doing a multi-year study where maybe you do a HR survey on employee satisfaction, you want that survey to be as close to the survey that was done in the previous year, so that the results line up as much as possible. The other thing that you'll also want to consider is data quality as you're entering information. Again, you generally want to limit long form answers if you're collecting a lot of data points. Like if you're collecting maybe 100 or 200 surveys, you generally don't want to be reading a couple sentences as your results. You want to try to categorize information up as much as possible. And another weird thing that we run into quite a bit during the data collection process. Like if you're asking people to enter dates, you want to standardize the date form that you use. Some people use month, day, year. Other people use day, month, year. So you want to just make sure that you're lining those things up so that it's consistent in your evaluation. You definitely want to respect privacy and confidentiality. So identify areas where you do have personally identifiable information. Make sure that you protect that by using by encrypting your spreadsheets or saving everything in encrypted environments. Generally, environments are encrypted if you're using some sort of cloud platform or a major vendor like Microsoft or Google or Amazon or something like that. Generally, the areas where that information is stored is confidential. But if you're not sure whether your environment is encrypted, it'd be best to go back to your IT team and just double check. You want to test and validate your data. There might be a lot of times, like for example, if you do conduct a survey and many applications actually have something that will publish your results for you, and if you don't go back and make sure that the data was collected in a standard form, your results might be a little wonky, and that's just because of how information is collected. Different people might collect information in different ways. So before you publish anything, it's definitely good that you test and validate your microdata to make sure that it's consistent. If it's not consistent, you may want to go back to the source of the information, or if you're able to identify where it's not consistent, you may be able to fix the information yourself. And finally, maintain documentation. This documentation includes how did you collect the information, who participated in your survey, or those sorts of things, and how did you keep track of them, who has access to your information. You do want to have documentation on what to do in the case of a data breach, which hopefully doesn't happen and it's very rare, but you do want to have that information just in case. Training documentation on how to protect your information. So again, always maintain documentation. Now, my final slide before we either get into questions or if we have time, although we're getting tight on time, quick demonstration. I do want to talk about how the department might be able to help you. And this slide is really geared towards people that have a grant with the department, have a federal grant, require some sort of evaluation that they at this time are unable to do. What I do over in the Maine Department of Labor is manage the Maine Department of Labor data warehouse. We have access to a lot of administrative records. Those records include quarterly wage records from employers, employer records, which basically just talks about the nature of business that an employer does. We have program records, but a lot of those program records would come from our partners who are running programs. We're able to match this information up in order to do grant evaluations. We do a lot of grant evaluations right now. I'd say we probably fill 50 to 100 a year. And if we are experts in this field, and we'd be happy to help in the case that you need some information in order to fulfill your grant requirements, in hopes that you continue to receive federal help and be able to help your employees or the folks that you're trying to help. So again, if you have any data collection issues, and you're trying to fulfill some sort of grant requirement, do not hesitate to reach out. We will try to help you in any way possible where we have time allocation. So we're definitely willing to help. So the purpose of this slide is just to let you know that we do have access to a lot of great information, and we may be able to help you with gathering information as well.
Hunter, can I interject really quickly?
Yes.
For people who are not hiring on the participants in their projects, so for example, they're putting on a training and they want to track the participants in that training, and they want to have help in tracking those people. Is JobLink the best site where they have all the participants sign up for a JobLink account, and then that helps you track, or do they actually have to collect private information like social security numbers?
Oh, ideally they collect social security numbers. If that's not possible, we have done workarounds in the past where you can have all the participants sign up for the JobLink and submit their social security numbers there. However, you still need to maintain a class roster with the person's name and date of birth so that we can match the information up that's in the JobLink in our environment. Basically, if you sign up for the JobLink, we don't know which course you're participating in by itself, but we are able to collect PII that folks may be unwilling to share with an organization. So that is one potential avenue. It does take more work on our part in order to fill that. So that is one avenue if you absolutely cannot collect social security numbers. But if you can collect social security numbers, that's the best avenue for us to help you out. The problem is wage records don't have any name information on it. We just basically receive a social security number, the employer identification, and how much a person got paid over the course of the quarter. So ultimately, we have to link that information up using a social security number, and going through the JobLink just adds a couple of additional layers. But it is something that we would be willing to offer for folks that are having a real hard time meeting their evaluation.
Okay, I just wondered, I have a bunch of partners asking that they're enrolling new participants now, and people have become more reticent about sharing their social security numbers because of what's going on around immigration. And so I wondered if there was another avenue. I will, for the most part, tell people, please try to get the social security number so that we're not overloading your team with requests. But it's good to know there's maybe a workaround if people are really stuck.
Yep. Yeah.
Thank you.
And Molly, we get this question quite a bit. So we might be able, we'll sit down, our team and you, and try to come up with the best solution, because ultimately we do want to minimize the amount of work that it takes on our partners in order to do these evaluations as well. We want to basically try to help folks out as much as we can. The most important thing is that we're getting people enrolled, and that we're giving folks the opportunity to grow in their careers the best they can. And so all the evaluation stuff, we're going to try to make it as easy as possible, while meeting the needs of the folks that are allowing us to send money as well. All right, we have about 10 minutes left. Molly, do you think we have enough time, or should we just end early? Or is there any interest in maybe exploring how to set up a Google form and how you can get information from it?
I'll leave it up to our listeners if there's interest, or if people just have questions.
I'm happy to have you walk through your demonstration.
All right, sounds good. We'll do a quick demonstration. We only, in 10 minutes, I'll basically probably make this as quick as possible. But I find Google Forms is basically an instrument, a way that you're able to collect information. And there are all kinds of products just like Google Forms, Microsoft Forms, SurveyMonkey. You could just put into Google, I want to make a form, and about 15 different data products will come up for you. Google Forms is just something that I've used in the past, which is why, and there is a free version to it, which is why I chose to use it as a demonstration today. Let me see if I can. So if you go to Google Forms, you can just Google Forms, or you can type in forms.google.com and you'll be able to get there. The only thing that you have to do in order to create a form is basically just click start a new form up in the top. And I will preface this to say you do need a Google account in order to build one of these. But if you have a Gmail, you can just use your Gmail account, or it's very easy to set one up. Once you're in a Google form, you may want to make a title to your, well, you will want to make a title of what you're trying to do. For example, we can make a form of how valuable this presentation was. So you would want a very detailed title with probably a description. For, in this case, I'm just going to just have presentation. If you want to set things up into different sections, you can add a section. Section 1 for us, for example, would just be just some sort of like ranking. So for example, these set of questions would ask participants to rank from 1 to 5 how valuable different areas of the presentation was. So 1 to 5 stars based on then you can create questions. These questions you can have as multiple choice fields, linear scales. I like to use the ratings personally. And because it's just, if you're collecting like a lot of information, like if you're collecting 200 data points, it's very easy to take a rating from 1 to 5 and take the average of that to get an idea of how to evaluate your information. So you may just have like a couple questions. How valuable did you feel the presentation was? 3, you may you can have 1 to 5 stars. You can have several questions. Was the engaging? And this again would be a rating scale. So you can continue to add questions to your Google form right here. When you're all done with it, you can just hit publish up here at the top. When you publish it, you basically can it will produce a link that you can use. You can get the link by clicking this link right here, or you can email it out to a group of folks. Generally, I just like to share the link. You can put the link on like embed it into a website, or just put it on an email or something like that, where people can click into it and answer the presentation, answer the form. One other thing that you might want to consider too, people may be able to go into the form and answer multiple times. So you'll want to go through the settings. For example, form defaults, let's see, responses, limit 1 response. You may want to set that to on. So I would go through settings as well and just put in some ramifications around it. But ultimately, once you have this link right here, you can go in and answer the survey. So we can go ahead and answer our survey. How valuable do we feel the presentation was? It was okay. I got a little something out of it, but it wasn't great. The presenter liked to ramble. We'll give him 2 stars. We'll go ahead and submit our form right here. If you want to, you can collect your responses directly from the form in your Google Drive. So if you go over to the responses right here, you can get real-time information on what the responses were. So the person, us who answered the survey, felt that the presentation was 3 stars and that the presenter was engaging in 2 stars. This helps you quite a bit. But if you want to basically download this information so that you can evaluate it in a different way, you can click this link to sheet right here, or there's more options. You can download the responses as a CSV. We'll download the responses as a CSV, and I'll show you what that looks like. Oh, I guess we have to unzip our CSV. Let's see. So basically have the timestamp of when the survey was filled out, and then the answers to your questions are right here. So if there were multiple people answering the question, we would have a lot of rows right here with a lot of different values. Hopefully we'd have some 5 stars here and some 5 stars here. And we can average that up and start to get some insight on whether the presentation that we were watching was engaging. And the speaker can use that information in order to tailor it to make a better presentation for next year. So that's one way that you can use Google Forms. Again, a lot of the forms are the same. The software is very similar. All of them allow you to download the information in a format that's digestible, so that you're able to manipulate the information and use it. But I always found Google Forms was pretty intuitive to collect information. And for a couple of the case studies that I gave during the presentation, like the second one when we were doing an employee satisfaction survey, or the third one where we were just doing some organic data collection, my recommendation would be to use some sort of form software like this. Have your employees enter the information into the software, and then you collect the responses and do the analysis on your end. And ultimately, I think this is a great tool. One other thing that I'll say as well, there are the free version of Google Forms technically doesn't meet some of the standards of PII. So you wouldn't want to be collecting social security numbers over the free version of Microsoft Forms, but they do offer enterprise versions where that information can be collected and encrypted. I don't have the information on top of me of what the price is or those sorts of things, but I'd be willing to help arrange those conversations as well if need be. But like Microsoft Forms has a way that you can encrypt your answers. I know Google Forms has a way that you can encrypt your answers. So generally, a lot of these softwares, the free version, you will not want to send PII over, but enterprise versions where you have a contract with a vendor generally will have encryption as you're moving information over the network, or encryption as the data lives in a particular area. With that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and that is all I have. Are there any?
Hunter, thank you so much. This was a really good overview.
You're welcome.
Folks, we are at time. I'm going to stop recording right now.